Hello, welcome back to school. So it's just a little bit before 9. I've wanted to get started on this stuff at 8. Well, that didn't work out because I got distracted looking up some stuff about this finagled thing over here. But I think I should be okay with figuring out what I need to do. As far as like just getting what I need to get done. So I have a list. Let me show you guys my list. Other than my huge pile here, this is my list. I don't know if I'm gonna do it all in this order, but we'll see what happens. I might do the easier stuff first, then I'll do the harder stuff, but I don't know. So, but first I'm gonna do number 1. Number 1 sounds fun, and number 1 sounds like it'll be educational, and it'll help me get used to using this finagle technology over there. So, I did go through the preface already. There's not a whole bunch in the preface. It's just like, hey, you should learn Latin because you should learn Latin. You will be smarter than most other people. Because you know Latin. I don't know. I can listen to it and I can read it, or like listen to it basically, but comprehension is a whole nother ball of wax. So, we're gonna go through and find chapter 1. I think there's like 5 chapters in this thing. That doesn't look like. What's somewhere in here? Is that chapter 1? That's chapter 1. Okay, we found chapter 1. And I did learn, actually this is part 1. I did learn that I can pull the book out and it will actually save the image that it saved, so I can actually follow along with the text. And I think that will help you guys too. We'll just follow along with the text together. So let me get comfy so that I'm not sitting all awkward here. Okay, so we should be set up at chapter 1. Oops, my thing is in the way, sorry.
1. About Latin. Lee 18. Quite simply, the most utterly wonderful thing. Please believe that it is not because of mental laziness that I have chosen that most all-embracing of abstract nouns.
I'm going to zoom out so that you guys can see it better. You guys could probably see it better than I can. I think that's probably going to be more important. I'm going to try to make it to be just a page. Okay, that should work. And I think if I go over here.
Rather, a more term. Please believe not Lee 18. Quite simply, about Latin. Chapter 1.
Okay, so that's the head of the page, I think. And then we're gonna do play. 3, 2, 1.
About Latin. Lee 18. Quite simply, the most utterly wonderful thing. Please believe that it is not because of mental laziness that I have chosen that most all-embracing of abstract nouns. Thing, rather, a more specific term. Language, subject, element of education, cultural feature might exclude one or more valuable aspects of Latin that I should not wish excluded. Here are just some of those aspects of Latin, the ones which spring most readily to mind. Latin is an academic subject easy enough for the least intelligent of us to grasp all its basic elements, and yet difficult enough to be demanding for its greatest scholars. As an instrument for training mind and character, Latin has no parallel, as we shall be seeing in chapter 3 and elsewhere. For well over 1,000 years, Latin was the means of communication that united the whole of Europe culturally and in every other significant way. Latin is the direct ancestor of, between them, the 5 so-called Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese and Romanian, of the largest European language group, and of both of the official South American languages. Spanish and Portuguese. Romance comes from the Latin word Romanicus, meaning of Roman style or Roman made. Latin is the ancestor and source of the portion, well over half of the English language, which derives partly directly from Latin, and partly through the Romance languages. When PHRTEOGMAE plus RD10 Eric came, mainly French, which for some centuries was England's official language. Not only that, but from almost the moment that English began to develop from being the spoken-only language that, in the mid-5th century, first arrived on the shores of what was then Britain, and to take on a written form as well, it did so with the help of Latin, which had been a written language in everyday use since the conversion to Christianity of Britain south of Scotland's border in the 6th century up, right from the beginning. Therefore, English grammar was worked out and formalized side by side with Latin, from which your language took even the alphabet that we use today. Indeed, not least remarkably, we even owe the very word alphabet to our Latin-speaking forebears, notwithstanding its not being a Latin word. It was they who adopted for the purpose the first two letters, alpha and beta, of the alphabet of the Greek language, which had been the primary influence on Latin, and had helped to make it the influential language it became. Latin is the language of arguably the two greatest legal systems in history, Roman law and English common law. Even today it is still the language of forensics technical material used in courts of law as, for instance, in the phrase corpus delicti. Latin is the language of most family, school, university, town, city and county mottos, and of the mottos of several states in the USA and most of the Canadian provinces. Even the fairly rare exception Honis Oigui Pence, which appears on Britain's royal coat of arms and those of several military regiments in public buildings in Britain and the Commonwealth, is ultimately derived from Latin, via French. Latin is the language of the binomial taxonomy of plants and animals invented by Linnaeus, and now used universally. Latin is the language used for chemical elements in compounds. The language that Latin replaced was the Celtic language. End of text.
I'm going to flip another page.
Please place your
I'm
document.
going to pause this and then we'll do that.
Latin has always been the main official language for the most widespread version of Christianity, the version centered on Rome, which ruled England religiously, constitutionally, socially, and in every other respect of any importance, for 900 years, and continued to rule much of Europe for several centuries after that as well. Latin is the language for which much of the greatest sung music of the last 1,500 years or so was written, and of even the occasional modern opera. Latin is the language of one of the three greatest literatures of all time, the other two being classical Greek literature and our English literature. Untranslated Latin is a quite significant part of present-day English, as we shall be seeing. Latin even features, in abbreviated form, fid def for fideli defensor, on every single one of the coins in our pockets, and can be expected to continue doing so as long as the pound sterling remains the basis of our currency. In the form of Helvetia, the Latin word for Switzerland, Latin is the language which appears on all coins and stamps of that country, etc. I have by no means come to the end. In short, Latin is an intrinsic part of us. It is to some extent even at the very heart of us. This thing that is Latin is worth a closer look, is it not? Porta, Chapter 2, Making the Best Use of This Book.
Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1, which basically says why you should learn Latin, or that Latin is all around us. I don't know. I don't know how long these are gonna be. Oh, I think I'm gonna just put all these in one video, and then we're gonna do, like, stamps, so that you guys can switch between the chapters if you want to follow along with this reading. So, we're gonna go on to chapter 2 now.
Read, ye gracious reader, as you arrive. Early, D gracious reader, we're making the best use. Chapter 2.
Okay, chapter 2.
Making the best use of this book. D gracious reader, as you arrive at this early part of the book that you have in your hands, I have a request to make of you, even an entreaty. It is that you throw yourself into the following pages wholeheartedly and with the utmost diligence. I ask this in the belief that there is no better way that you can spend such time as you are able to make available for this purpose. That is to say, no way you can spend the time more valuably, not merely more usefully, more satisfyingly, or even, other than in the sense of instant and swiftly come and gone gratification, more enjoyably. I really am referring to your tackling Latin. I am doing so, however, to the accompaniment of a stipulation which is also one of the essential factors governing how this book has been put together. By tackling Latin, I mean setting about learning Latin in the way that it was always learned in the past, century after century, until the revolution in all education that hit England, and indeed most of the Western world, like a bombshell in the 1960s. Throughout the entire history of education during the last 1,000 years or so, up until the 1960s, what is said here would have been accepted almost universally, throughout Europe and, until a little earlier, throughout America North and South, as ordinary common sense and would have been acted upon as such. For much of the time, Latin, together with Greek but with children embarking on learning it before Greek, actually was education. So much was this so that, until the 1850s, Latin and Greek were the only subjects formally taught at all leading schools in England. Indeed, in some of those schools, as also in Harvard University in America, it was required that even outside the classroom only those languages could be spoken. End of text.
Wow. I should have marked it. This is a British, like an English book, so there's going to be some differences. Okay, resuming with chapter 2.
E.E. on Allen and Greek in schools was not, of course, that our ancestors supposed there to be no need to study the other basic subjects, English, mathematics, one or more currently spoken foreign languages, history, geography, and what was commonly called scripture. The 18th and 19th centuries, after all, were a period during which Britain shone in every single human endeavor, academic and practical, to such an extent that, single-handed, Britain was responsible for the Industrial Revolution, and most of the scientific inventions of that period that changed the world, and, for better or for worse, actually ruled about a quarter of the world, and, what is more, all this while producing one of the greatest literatures of every kind of all time. No, the reason that the non-classical subjects were not taught in schools was that they were considered to be so easy by comparison with Latin and Greek, especially to people with minds and characters trained by the study of the classics, that it was not thought worth wasting valuable schoolroom time on them. Picking them up was something that could more appropriately be done during the school holidays and in other spare time. Even during the 10 years or so of my own school days from the age of 7 onwards, we did not have teachers of English as such. The English we learned was taught by our classics teachers, as it always had been. We did not suffer from that. The result, on the contrary, was that the ordinary schoolboy and schoolgirl was able to write English much better than someone of equivalent intelligence could write today. Indeed, I believe I can safely say that the very great majority of readers who use this book as I recommend will, by the time they have finished it, have learned a really enormous amount of valuable English which they had no idea even existed. I intend no exaggeration in saying that. Arnon, as one made clear in the preface, this book covers a large amount of ground. It concentrates very much on the early stages of Latin than it does on the more advanced ones. This is for good reason. In the first place, the size of this book dictates it. In the second place, it is making a really, Miss book, good start that matters, whether you abandon Latin at that point having even so already benefited greatly, or whether you continue on in the quest for real mastery of it. May this book help to bring back much that was commonplace and basic in former times. End of text.
Oh, it read over there. I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to, how this thing reads, but that's the rest of the text right there. Okay, so moving on to chapter 3, which I think is going to be one of the longer ones. Yeah, chapter 3 is going to be a longer one, so we're going to skim that. Okay, so now we're going to start chapter 3.
Chapter 3. The importance of learning Latin, examined in detail. Is the most demanding of the chapters in this introductory section of the book. I believe it to be well worth your while to read it with some care, and indeed I hope you will help to propagate its message. Ian Paul Getty, an American industrialist whose interests were mainly centered on oil, and who up till the time of his death in 1976 was reckoned to be the richest man in the world, used to employ classicists to run his worldwide network of companies. Other industrialists might have considered the first necessary qualification to be a degree from Harvard or Yale Business School, or some such, but not he. Once asked why he insisted on employing classicists, his reply was, "They sell more oil, they made him more money." At the other social and economic extreme, an article in the Independent newspaper of November 4, 1987 reported that, in some parts of America, the classics had been revived to help inner-city black youths in particular, and with extraordinary results. In Indianapolis, for example, 411-year-olds who had been receiving daily Latin teaching were significantly better, not only in reading and spelling but also in maths and science, than a group who followed the normal curriculum. This was of course despite those who followed the normal curriculum having more time for the other subjects, because of the time taken up with Latin. I asked my readers to take careful note of that. Those who received daily Latin teaching were better at the other subjects than the other group, even though they spent significantly less time on those other subjects. We shall be coming across much more evidence to the same effect in the following pages. Nor were these freak results, as experts on education in the higher reaches of academia have been claiming since those results were first published. They are simply confirmations of what has been found whenever the opportunity to compare has arisen again and again in the past, based certainly on my own experience of teaching, but based also on what has been said in the past by countless people in the best possible position to know. It is my firm conviction that an education grounded solidly on the classics is an education many thousands of times better, once again I intend no exaggeration, than any education offered today, and would be even if all the subjects taught today were taught as well as they could be. Let us remind ourselves too that the long period of classics, only education at schools, which started gradually to come to an end only in the middle of the 19th century, was the period of Britain's peak of success in most fields of human endeavor. It is, however, all very well for me to say that, but simply setting down the facts does not necessarily carry conviction, no matter how true the facts obviously are. Exactly why is it and bo is it, therefore, that Latin has this extraordinary and marvelous effect on everyone, of whatever background or intellectual inheritance. I pluck you by the sleeve, dear reader, and beg for your closest attention to what now follows. I stress too that I am by no means well-known experts on education in the highest reaches of academia today do indeed typically detest the experiment in Indianapolis and elsewhere in America, and maintain that it is nothing but anecdotal evidence and deeply flawed. They typically assert that, for it to be a true experiment, another group of children should have been taught French or German instead of Latin, and doubtless the results would have been similar if not better. A supposition does not become fact simply because the world's leading experts state it to be fact. However, I invite readers to consider this particular supposition in the light of the evidence and reasoning that I shall be including in the rest of this chapter, and also in the knowledge that academia has been in full cry in its attacks on the classics as part of education, since much earlier than the 1960s, indeed since well over a century ago. Plus, extensive quotations by some of the most impressive authors on the subject will be found on the website. End of text.
I gotta still check out that website. I'm gonna mark the next page. Okay.
At that site, on the sort of thing that experienced educators have said in the challenge on the subject. In summary, what a well-designed course in Latin provides is a training and development of the mind and character to a degree of excellence that no other mental or physical activity can come anywhere near to bringing about. Specifically, it trains these: the ability to concentrate and focus, the use of the memory, the capacity to analyze, deduce and problem solve, the powers of attention to detail, of diligence and perseverance, of observation, of imagination, of judgment, of taste. In fact, it trains the mind and character to the utmost extent in everything human that is valuable. It does all this as no other academic subject, other than classical Greek, or other activity of any kind at all, can come remotely close to doing. Once again, it is all very well for me simply to state this. Do you believe it to be even possible? Does what I claim even perhaps seem absurd? It remains, therefore, to show how we can know it to be true those far-teaching claims than by looking carefully at a representative example of Latin educating in action. Here, therefore, is such an example, given in the form of showing what is necessary Latin sentence that is part of a reasonably difficult piece of Latin prose, written by a highly regarded Latin author. First of all, you examine the words in the sentence sufficiently to break the sentence down into its various clauses. See page 29 for what a clause is. Then, taking the clauses one at a time, you start with what you had identified as the main clause or one of the eita, and I mean more count the individual words in it word forms. In doing this you are calculating in verbs. They're A1, zeroing observation and of attention to detail. Next, you need to bring your powers of strongly into play, in order to see which words belong together and how the various words relate to each other. In Latin, rom times be far from obvious, and you will have them the F2SK, weighing up various alternatives before coming up with your first solution. Even when you have done it with all due care, your first solution, however, may well need to be only a provisional solution. You must therefore now ask yourself, is this solution correct? In the case of a clause, you must look carefully at the clause preceding it or otherwise most closely related to it, to see if everything in the clause confirms your solution, or if, rather, you need to try another alternative. In the case of a complete sentence, you must check the previous sentence, and in some cases you may find even that the subsequent sentence will force you to change your mind. By this stage, you have, simply by translating in accordance with the rules of grammar that you have learnt and are able to apply, already called into play your powers of observation, of reasoning, of identifying alternatives and then choosing between them, and of making judgments. You have also learned the need to make one or more independent checks to ensure that the result at which you have arrived is indeed the correct one. The process by no means stops there, far from it. By considering various English words available for you to use for the translation of each Latin word in the sentence, and choosing carefully the ones for your translation, you are forcing yourself to gain clearer, fuller and more knowledgeable insights into your own language. Further, you will often find yourself coming across Latin words for which there is no English equivalent, and in consequence you will be made to enlarge on what you can conceive with your mind, and on the ideas you can entertain and make use of. Next, there is the moral aspect to add to the intellectual aspect that has featured so far. In doing all that you have done so far, you are training not only your mind but your character as well. From the outset, right from when you make your very first efforts of translating either into English or into Latin, you will be running into difficulties which do not exist when you are dealing with English by itself. Addressing these difficulties will not only need a flexibility of mind that was not needed before, it will also need determination and perseverance, so that you are able to continue for as long as is needed, until you have earned the deep satisfaction of having triumphed over every obstacle. End of text.
Okay, next section. Okay. I don't know if that helps me if I hold the book out, because it's hard for me to see the text, like, to follow along, and I don't want to be in real close because some people do not like that. Okay, continuing.
Here 18 yet more ITU diet data equally satisfactory translation. You need to aim at reproducing, in an English way, what is there in the Latin that may not be directly translatable. This may involve putting emphasis in the right places and reproducing such features as logical coherence, persuasiveness, heart-stopping emotion, sheer literary beauty, or whatever. You will be developing mental subtlety. You will also be developing good taste. Furthermore, with practice the stage will be reached when this whole process will have become so customary as to be often relatively effortless for you, sometimes even to the extent of being almost automatic. By then you will have gone a long way towards developing an intellect and a character which will serve you well, faithfully, efficiently and speedily, in any problems of any kind that you may find yourself faced with in any activity of any kind in your life that you find yourself engaging in. Finally, differing according to whichever great Latin author, admired over many centuries, you are trying to translate, you will, as a side effect, have made yourself to some extent acquainted with elements of one or more of history, geography, laws, religion and culture that will have broadened your mind and widened your sympathies. All this is the sort of thing that you can have gained from one vain single sentence in the right manner. Thought that I have chosen this particular example, that of what needs to be applied when translating a reasonably difficult Latin sentence in a reasonably difficult piece of Latin prose for purposes of illustration, rather than to present anything approaching a complete picture of Latin, learning in action and what is to be gained from it. What I have been outlining applies in lesser or greater degree to any other example I might have cove, whether a translation done by beginners or a translation sentence I have selected will be undemanding for all. Kind of that is all very well. Some may sing for them. However, one of the modem sene respond. Could gauges do exactly the same? Addition 0 being obviously of more practical use, equals E. My answer, and the answer of great educators of the past, is simply no, for the purpose of education, as opposed to merely acquiring a valuable skill. All modern languages are far inferior to Latin. First, one of the supreme advantages of Latin is, in the right sort of way, the difficulty of it, even though, by an apparent paradox, it is also easy enough at the outset for even my 4-year-old pupils to find it manageable and enjoyable without my in any way compromising how it is taught. No modern language comes close to approaching Latin in difficulty. It is the very difficulty of Latin that, however apparently off-putting, is an important part of what makes it such a valuable preparation for life. Secondly, no modern language has a literature that comes close to deserving to be revered as the writings of Latin author after Latin author have deservedly been revered throughout the centuries since they were written, and I could continue with a thirdly and many more. All in all, it is no wonder that Jean-Paul Getty, who knew as much about making money as anyone in his day, insisted on classicists and only classicists being chosen to run his companies, and no wonder that experience has consistently shown that, with children, those who are not taught Latin in the correct manner come nowhere by comparison with those who are. I shall close this essay, on the place of Latin in education, with the claim that is most controversial of all, and, because it is so controversial, I ask my readers to make sure that they register exactly what I am claiming, as opposed to even the smallest exaggeration of it. If I were to be faced with the choice, and I stress that it is not a choice that I should like to be faced with, on the one hand, this includes even the more demanding ones, such as present-day Polish, which, although not derived from Latin, resembles classical Latin in a remarkable number of ways. It is characterized by a high D of inflection. It is relatively free word order. There are no articles, and there is frequent dropping of subject pronouns, with the verb endings being sufficient to make these pronouns understood. Not that, in any case, Polish, or any other modern language fitting that description, is likely to be chosen for English pupils as a language useful enough to include in school syllabuses. End of text.
I've never studied Polish. Next section. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna see if I can find like a book prop or something for this because, yeah. Okay, I think we're set up. Did that play? It should have played.
Gwynn's Latin, capital N. Giving children for whom I had responsibility in education consisting of a wide variety of useful subjects, or even relatively few useful subjects as was standard in the education of my day, on the other hand, giving them an education consisting on live Latin and of no other subjects whatever, even in their spare time, should unhesitatingly opt for the Latin-only alternative, no matter who the children were and no matter what their intellectual abilities were, let alone what their stated preference would be if consulted at any point. My reason is simply that the benefits to the child, and to the future adult if the second alternative would be so greatly superior as to be, once again, beyond the possibility of comparison, at least in percentage terms. The reality is that true education is only secondarily, and very much secondarily, about the amount and variety of knowledge that one picks up during the course of it. Primarily, it is about developing our mind, character and taste so that, once the education is complete, we can pick up effortlessly and quickly whatever knowledge and skills we wish to, whether for practical use or for enjoyment at any point in our lives. People's capabilities resulting from such an education will be so great by comparison with what those capabilities would have been that they would have reason to be grateful, whether their tasks were running a country on the one hand, or, to descend into bathos, picking up the skills needed to play table tennis on the other hand. Thus the value of Latin in education and why. Let us recall too, one last time, that historically the choice I have made is not eccentric, and that Latin and its classical sister were the exclusive subject matter in leading schools for centuries. Moreover, not only did Britain flourish during much of that time, but complaints by the victims of this education were remarkably few, even though a much more varied education was standard in other European countries at the same time. CNT Baimel, Wang. End of text.
Okay, so now we're gonna go on to chapter 2. That's my book holder. I just saw this is chapter 4, not chapter 2.
EEESC or Insepiar is 1 are you say use I say Serena Eid. D. Chapter 4. Is how to learn Latin? Essentially, more than ever before since the effective abolition of Latin in schools in and around the 1960s, Latin has been making a comeback, and some schools even mention it as an important feature of their syllabus. What is more, this enthusiasm is also very much reflected in the publishing world and elsewhere. Both the Oxford University Press and the Cambridge University Press are selling in considerable quantity their lavish, multi-volume Latin courses that were first published in 1988 and 1977 respectively. Other titles have been pouring out. The Beginner's Minimus books, the 3 volumes So You Really Want to Learn Latin by N.R.R. Olton, James Morwood's Latin Grammar, John Taylor's Essential GCSE Latin, Harry Mount's Amo Amazamont, Mark Walker's Annus Horribilis and Annus Mirabilis, among others. The Association for Latin Teaching, founded more than a century ago, is still flourishing. Friends of Classics, the society co-founded and headed by the wonderfully learned Dr. Peter Jones, is enjoying more respect and influence than ever before, and the superb classicist Professor Mary Beard is in continual demand on radio and television, as well as in print. In short, the evidence shows that the battle is well on the way to being won. Do not believe it. Do not believe it. I am certainly not saying that there are no good books among those of relatively recent publication date, or that such organizations as the Association for Latin Teaching and Friends of Classics are not doing useful work. I am saying that the effect in the right direction of even the best of the books available in selling well, let alone of the worst of them equals at the present time appears tragically negligible, and close to being irreversibly so. My own experiences of teaching Latin, which must be at least as. End of text.
I gotta turn the page. Ooh, looks like a table. Scan the next page. Next page.
Extensive and wide-ranging as those of any other teachers teaching today, are even by themselves fully sufficient to show that. Over a period of many years now, I have taught Latin to people of all age groups from 3 years old to over 70, in various parts of the world, in every kind of circumstance from lecture halls to school classrooms to home schools, to individuals, in person and face-to-face over the internet. I make, with due and becoming modesty, no claim to any special gifts as a teacher. I do, however, make the most emphatic claims on behalf of my traditional, trite and tested over many centuries teaching methods. The difference in effectiveness between the traditional methods and those used by even the best school teachers of today is astonishing, consistently so, that descriptions of my methods and their results have featured again and again in prominent articles in newspapers. In these articles, what tends to be singled out for special mention, not surprisingly, for it is obviously newsworthy, if only for its apparent absurdity, is my claim to be able to teach any school child more Latin in about half an hour than the child will have learned at school during its previous no matter how many years of learning Latin. That claim must seem ridiculous and verging on insane at first sight, and at second sight too for that matter, one assure you, though, gracious reader, that have no interest in putting my professional credibility at risk, one stand fully behind my public and well-publicized challenge. For instance, if you visit the gweinerteaching.com website, you can see there the testimonial of a 17-year-old boy who had been studying Latin at school for some years, who had passed all his exams in Latin, a fact which in retrospect seems to him absurd, who was about to go to Cambridge to read classics there, and who confirms that I did for him, in the space of about half an hour, exactly what I claimed I could, nor is this an isolated piece of anecdotal evidence. It is completely typical, as well as being what one would logically expect. Do you find this difficult to believe even so? Perhaps you will find it less so if one devote just a small amount of space to explaining the relevant technicalities of the traditional and modern ways teaching Latin, and to comparing first lesson with any new pupil or group of pupils. One open in my by teaching how Latin is pronounced, which is not difficult to pick up, and then move on to the easiest noun to learn, the one most usually chosen to represent the first declension, and saw meaning able. Immediately after that I teach what is called the present tense, the tense which in any verb indicates what is being done here and now, of the equivalent verb, traditionally amd meaning one love. Here is how are and amd go, set out in the traditional way, plural. Nominative, for the subject, vocative, the addressing case, accusative, for the object, genitive, the of case, dative, the case for to or for, ablative, for by, with, from, and son seen son see, and siam, and serum, isis. The present tense of amd, plural first person, I love second person, you love aim as you love amond is third person, he, she, it loves amont, they love among the pupil or pupils. The more of them the better at this early stage. Recite these with me at the tops of their voices, until they have learned them by heart. This does not take long. I then explain the significance of each ending, what the words mean when they end in their various different ways. Very soon we are ready to translate our first sentence into Latin. We love they can read off the page they are looking at, just as you can read it a few lines higher while on this page. When they have done that, one provide the information that the Latin for girl is pula, which goes exactly like, has the same endings as on principle. I normally do not dumb down technical terms, but here are two exceptions to my general rule. Latin teachers and students have always used goes like to indicate that a word is the same endings 8. End of text.
Next section.
H. Har. On Liggey's grammar, which one use extensively at this stage, which indeed is how it originally came to be written. The pupil works out that the girls must be in the accusative case, which is the case for objects in a sentence or clause, and of course in the plural number. The answer is not difficult to arrive at, animus pulag or preferably, because the verb tends to come at the end of a sentence in Latin, pulis animus. The pupil typically finds great satisfaction in achieving this. Equally typically, we reach this stage within the first half hour of our first lesson, as was no less typical with the teaching of Latin in the past. Note too, please, that, as was always done in the past, we start with translating English into Latin rather than Latin into English. That is the only order in which any new language can be learned efficiently and quickly, and in Latin, and also in classical Greek. This applies much more than most other languages, because of the multitude of different forms of the nouns, pronouns, adjectives and verbs, according to how they are being used. Now let us turn to someone whose study of Latin has been based on the 5-volume Cambridge Latin course, which at the time of writing is used in about 85% of schools in England, and has so far sold a staggering 4 million copies. In the course's Volume 1, or its equivalent is set out as in the table I gave above. Not until page 32 do we learn about the cases of nouns at all, and then only the nominative and accusative cases are given. Unbelievably, not until page 119 are we given another case, the dative. Even more unbelievably, if unbelievableness admits of degrees, that is it, for Volume 1 in the 199 pages of Volume 1, no further cases are given. During the course of the 184 pages of Volume 2, a further 2 of the 6 cases are given at intervals, the vocative and the one that has been learned, and the word endings is a similarly traditional denoting what is technically termed the inflexton, that is usually the final part of the Latin verb, or noun, which changes according to how it is being used. Wotit, genitive, the ablative is yet to come. Most unbelievably of all, by the end of 207 pages of Volume III, the ablative is still to come. It finally appears in the 4th volume, Volume IJB. Verbs are treated in similarly illogical fashion, though not to such an extreme extent. The Oxford Latin course is not as extravagant as that in the number of volumes over which it spreads information that should properly be learnt on the very first day of starting to learn Latin. Otherwise, however, it is similarly illogical. In both courses, the concentration is wholeheartedly on translating from Latin into English, with no English into Latin in the first volume of the Cambridge, and perhaps 10% English into Latin compared to Latin into English in the first volume of the Oxford, and at the end of each chapter rather than right at the beginning. Now, I do not like to make public criticisms of the work of others. Moreover, both of these books are the result of an immense amount of hard work and, for the most part, excellent scholarship, and are beautifully presented as well as very informative, and a great pleasure to read. It is, however, impossible for me to try to persuade teachers and pupils not to use these and similar books for teaching Latin unless I name them. Bluntly, both courses are impossible to learn Latin from, and indeed none of those who wrote them could have learned their Latin in any such way. Not difficult, completely impossible. There is no encouragement to learn the endings by heart. and plenty of discouragement from doing so, and translating either way Latin into English or English into Latin cannot be done without that. Moreover, the effect of such textbooks is considerably worse than mere uselessness and wasted money. My experience with pupil after pupil who has come to me after using one or other of them has shown them to be actually dreamful in their effects. The reason is not difficult to understand. Very necessary for learning Latin, and of great value in every human activity acquired, are the abilities to analyze closely and exactly, to dedicate to problem solve. None of these is possible in Latin without an exact knowledge of the endings and how each of them must. Semen SO 00. End of text.
Next section. Okay, hold that and then come over here.
Emory alternate. T. That of guessing. Guessing, therefore, is what those who use the Cambridge Latin course and the Oxford Latin course are forced to learn to do. In the first place, however, guessing simply cannot even begin to work with a language which is inflected, with its nouns, adjectives and verbs constantly changing their form according to their role in the sentence, and, b, has no consistent word order, as almost all modern languages do but Latin does not. In the second place, as with every action that is repeated, guessing, as a substitute for making the effort of analyzing, swiftly becomes about it, and a habit, moreover, which, again as is characteristic with habits that are continually reinforced, soon becomes difficult if not impossible to get out of. So it is that, routinely, I find it more difficult to teach Latin to those who have used either of those two courses for any length of time, than to teach beginners. Indeed, the stage is reached when learning Latin properly has become next to impossible for the former. My experience confirms only too forcefully that the products, victims, of modern Latin teaching are afflicted with what could be called incurable modern teaching-induced grammatical dyslexia. Therefore, no, the battle to restore Latin is not well on the way being won. The final problem I need urgently to bring to everyone's attention is that there are now no, or virtually no, teachers left in schools who themselves were taught Latin in the traditional, time-honored, tried and tested way. If there are any left who have not yet retired, it makes no practical difference, because they will not have been allowed to teach in the traditional way, and they will almost certainly have lost whatever ability to do so that they once had. The relevance of this stems from an important teaching principle, the principle that one can only teach as one was taught. For instance, a single Latin verb can have well over 200 different compet the 4 or 5 different endings of the normal English as in play, plays, playing, played, and sing, singing, sang, sung. A career have well over 1,000. Oneself. Teaching is not something that one can learn to do by reading a book about it, though I hope this book comes as close as any book can to achieving that. Those who have not themselves experienced the method which teaches Latin most thoroughly, most exactly and most quickly, simply cannot teach it in that way, as both logic and my experience in trying to teach to, is not it is difficult in Pine to learn now T0 correctly. That manner of teaching is only a matter of common sense, and I have succeeded in teaching it to willing learners within a week or so. Although not difficult in principle, it is, however, difficult in practice if one has spent a significant part of one's teaching career teaching differently from how it should be done. The main reason is, once again, the force of habit. So much for what must be known and understood in order for there to be any chance of things being put right. Time now to be constructive. End of text.
Okay, chapter 2. Or whatever chapter this is. I think it's chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a short one. It's only a couple pages. I would say, because I started off with the grammar method, which is what it sounds like this guy's recommending, I think I got a pretty good start. The only thing that's confusing for me is not having an understanding of the declensions and all that stuff, but definitely memorizing the endings is really, really important. So that's what I have to say about the last chapter.
Chapter 5, capital E, How in fact to learn Latin. And by very definition, there can only be one best way to learn Latin. Happily, it is not difficult to identify it. It is the way in which I was taught. It is the way in which generations before me were taught. It is the way which has been shown to work best for people of all ages, gifts of intellect, and ability to apply themselves. And it is the way in which I teach my pupils of all ages today, with all languages, but with Latin and Greek more than almost every other. The material that needs to be learned in order to achieve mastery falls under 3 headings. 1, most obviously of all, is vocabulary. The second is the subdivision of grammar technically known as accidents, sometimes called morphology, which is how some classes of words change their form in accordance with what role they are playing in a sentence or clause. This happens very little in English, the main changes being singular nouns changing their form in the plural, as in noun and nouns, verbs changing their form according to number and tense, as in love, loves and loved, and pronouns indeed changing their form according to how they are being used in a sentence, as in me and mine, and who. whom and whose. The third heading is the other subdivision of grammar, syntax, which is how to choose the parts of the words whose accidents we have learned as we need to, and to put them together in order to convey the sense we want. In every human activity of any complexity without exception, there is a due order in which that activity should be learned, step by step, in order for the learning to be both accurate and speedy. To put it in philosophical terms, the science governing the activity in question, the part of it applicable to everybody who studies it, must be thoroughly Wendite Saint's art, the personal style which varies from individual to individual according to his or her inherited talents and other circumstances, be tackled in the human activity of which learning a new language consists. What follows from the principle just set out is that, side by side with learning the vocabulary, and I mean really learning it, not simply registering the meaning of a new word in our mind on a temporary basis, we first of all learn the word forms, their accidents, by heart, and then, and only then, practice using them, learning and applying the appropriate syntax. As with all human activities, there is no other adequate way, in terms of effectiveness and speed, of learning a new language. To try to launch into Latin or any other academic subject by being creative and by guesswork can achieve little other than the formation of bad habits which will be difficult, in fact verging on impossible to eliminate. Try to learn tennis by watching some first-class tennis on television, and then going straight onto a court afterwards and engaging in a game, without having been told which size of racket you should use, without having been carefully taught the correct way to hold the racket, and without fairly extensive instruction and practice of the forehand swing, the backhand swing and the serve. The chances are that, because of incorrect habits that you will have quickly acquired, you will never be, or come anywhere near to being, the tennis player you could have been. It is the same with Latin. First, learn by heart the endings of the simplest nouns, and of the tenses, one by one, of the regular verbs. Then, as each set of endings is learnt, practice using them. Do not move on to the next set of endings of nouns and verbs, until the one being learned has been mastered so thoroughly that the endings have become effortless, about as effortless as reflex actions, to remember and to apply in their appropriate contexts. This all-important division of what constitutes science and art discussed in more detail in Gwinn Grammar, on page X in the Perfac. End of text.
Next section. This is the last page.
I must really stress that, in learning Latin, there are, Alice, no shortcuts. Attempt a shortcut, and you will end up either with a knowledge of Latin that is frustratingly inadequate at best, or with the need for much more time and effort for an adequate knowledge than would have been necessary if you had proceeded in the orderly, scientific way. Yes, much more time. A piano teacher once told me, as a morsel of traditional wisdom that had come her way, that it takes 14 times longer to learn something having first learned it incorrectly than it takes to learn it correctly in the first place. In my experience, I have never found any reason to doubt or all that remains under this heading of how best to learn Latin is the matter of how best to learn by heart the accidents that needs to be learnt, that is to say, the following. What are called the declensions of the nouns, pronouns, adjectives and numerals, together with the comparatives and superlatives of the adjectives and adverbs, the conjugations of verbs, of which there are basically 4, the principal parts of the irregular verbs, of which there are some 200 in total, but not all of which are of immediate importance, a few other specials. This can be done at any age, the earlier the better. I really do mean that, starting at 3 years old, when memorizing is at its best and when using what is memorized is not yet possible, is ideal. Children typically enjoy this when it is taught in a rhythmic way, especially when more than one person can do the reciting tajab in the same rhythm. On the gweinerteaching.com website you can find me and others reciting declensions and conjugations, the rhythms that experience has shown to be easier for memorizing. I strongly recommend going to one or other of these pages the website and doing the reciting with us, so that the rhythms are most easily mastered and remembered. End of text.
I'll have to try that. Maybe they've got something with a quiz, quiet, quid thing. Whatever. I still don't know those. Okay, that concludes that. That was very exciting. I don't know if my knowledge is actually being taught in the correct manner as what this guy says, but I do know all the endings. Well, I need to review them, but the endings for the verbs. Okay, so that can go away. Okay. I don't know what that is. I think this still can go away here. This isn't a real chalkboard. Yeah. Okay, so now I need to figure out what to do for the rest of my homework for chapter 3. And we're gonna do that next. Okay, I'm gonna jump down to number 6 on my little thing. which says tables, but half of it got erased. So I've been working on these gradually throughout the past couple days. I'm on chapter 3. I wrote out all the nouns. I still need to go through and decline the cases that I know. And then I've done all the verbs. Of course, they've only introduced one person and one number and one tense, so that shouldn't be too difficult. I think I wrote those out, or at least got them started, like the header. I need to find out what the principal parts on these ones are, and then just quickly write those out. And then adjectives should be pretty straightforward. Let's see what else is on here. Pronouns. I think I already wrote these ones out. I need to verify and figure out what these keywords are, because seeing them as they are is kind of throwing me off. Like, as they are, I think if I write in what they are, it'll be easier for me to put them together in my mind. Adverbs, those I just have to memorize. And whatever these things are, I just have to memorize too. Neque, that one sounds familiar. Quia, I think that's because. Yeah. And then O. Just means O. So I'm going to work out these real quick, just filling in the rest of the tables that I have. And then I'll see what else I'm going to do after that. Okay, so it's just about 3. I need to get ready to leave. I got everything that I wanted to get done on the tables, and I feel better with reviewing those because I did deal with some conjugations and declensions that we haven't done. So after doing those, I feel better. So I'm going to mark that off on my little paper thing, or my slate. So that's the tables are done. Yeah. Let me see here. Let me do a quick zip through of the reading of chapter 4 in the next part here. Okay, so this is going to be a real quick zip through skim, more or less, of the reading that I have to do that I'm not going to get done. I'm just going to kind of skim through it and see if I can figure out what's going on, just get a general idea. So, there's not going to be a lot of talking in here. Sorry. Okay, so we got the persons of Metis, Emilia, and Julius. Seculus. I don't know what that means. It sounds familiar, like we've sung it. It's a pretty important word because it shows up quite a bit. Okay, so there she's asking a question of, I'm thinking of what he has. Saculo. Oh, they're talking about money and currency. Okay, so the saculus must be the sack. Okay. So he says we have 100. Amelia says something about 100. She says, are you sure there's 100? He starts counting, which obviously by the weight of the bag, you notice that there's a couple missing. Yeah. So this sounds like, there's money missing. Okay, so it sounds like it's a mystery tale of somebody stole the Roman man's money. And if you work for this guy, like if you're a slave, you don't want to be on the bad end of his stick. So it sounds like they're not very generous. Okay. So now they're calling the slave, or the slaves. They've got Medus. They're talking about David. I think they're talking about David. Call David. I think Medus is saying the call David, if I'm not mistaken. It's just a skim through. Yeah, they're calling David. Okay, so that's Skyna Prima, here's Skyna Seconda, Julius. Okay, so David does come, so now you have David in the scene. They're asking about the money. He says, answer me. Responde, Dave. I don't know if we're gonna, actually, we might. If this is only 2 scenes, we might get through the whole thing in one class period. Amelia's saying something about listening. Okay, so David's responding. David, conversation between Julius and David. What is V-Days to see? It's weird because they're using forms that I don't know. I think V-Day is like a command to see. I don't know what, like, that's the imperative or something? I don't know. No, it's the one where you command people. Is it the imperative? I don't know. Oh, there's 3 scenes. Did I miss one? Okay, so we have Julius and Amelia. Yes, Marus. So they're asking where one of the slaves are. Benny Medus. I think I added a T on that. Yeah, they're using other forms of these verbs that I'm not sure what they are. Yeah, we might finish this in one class. So there's like, I don't know. Okay, so now they're more introducing of the vocative. Oh, here. Imperatitus et indicativus. That's a V in there, right? Italics is hard to see. Okay, so they're introducing those 2. It's really fun when Magister reads these grammar things. Okay, so that pretty much concludes a quick brief through of a skim of the reading. It's not a full, authentic read through, but I kind of have an idea. Basically, there's money missing. And they need to find the money. They need to figure out who it is. Obviously, because, and there's the verb stuff is just different. So yeah, I'm gonna get my stuff together because I need to leave, and I guess I'll chit chat with you guys later. Okay, so this is gonna be a quick rundown of what we did for Latin. Hopefully, it'll be short and succinct. I don't know. So first, after I yawn, we we looked through the written tables. I think for the most part things were okay. I forgot to ask him. There was the third principal part of the fourth conjugation on some of the verbs that looked really funny. So I need to ask about that. But everything else I think was okay. Um, and we did. Let me see here. I didn't get any of the written stuff done, so I still have to do that, which is fine because we haven't really started officially reading the chapter for chapter 4. But chapter 3 homework is still, yeah, I need to get that done. It'll give me more practice with the keywords for sure. We did recitemus, just running through the verbs and partials and full tables, nouns, declensions, and the cue things, just to kind of see that I understood what they were. With the cue words, like we tried, like I explained the things in English okay, but I couldn't get the right English construction of what it was. Like if it was like the bird which is in the tree sings beautifully, um I had a hard time getting that. And I like got said that right because that was what Magister was trying to get me to say. Because I think I had said something about the bird in the tree sings beautifully. And he says, well, the bird is already in the tree. We need to know which bird in relation to something else. It's, I don't know. But yeah. So, I'm kind of still wrapping my head around that in English. So I don't know. I don't know. Um, let me see here. So after recitemos, we did unos, dos, tres, which is pretty fun. We just did like a page or something. It was like a short lesson. We It was basically like opening and closing the mouth and the eyes and then going upstairs and downstairs. Yeah, I get a kick out of that, but Manchester is like, I'm glad you like this. um, it's more, it's just kind of like, for me, it's fun Latin. I don't have to learn the grammar. I don't have to learn the words, although, um, some words I kind of am learning, like to close, although I can't think of it because I don't say it. But when he says it, I know what the word is. Um, and like to open, I think those words have been used enough. Mensa, liber. Um, I think there's cla calumus. I think is a writing utensil. Um, so there's some stuff that I am kind of picking up just because I'm hearing the words. Um, so yeah, that's kind of fun. So it's kind of like fun Latin, but I don't really have to like learn the words or anything. Um, but ironically, I'm kind of picking up stuff. So yeah. Magister is starting to kind of he just he just finds it funny. He says he says, you want immersive Latin, here you go. So yeah, it's fun. And it gets me up and out of the chair too. Um so that's fun. So then after that we looked through the vocabulary of chapter 4, which now that I'm starting to fill out the tables, um we filled in a couple more pronouns, which I'm gonna see if we can go through not all the vocabulary, but some of the vocabulary in the other chapters so that I could take notes of what they are, because when I look at them, there's no gender or gender. There's no case or anything to tell me what they are. So, maybe we could do that next week or something. But there's like I just want to I don't know why I'm not taking notes, but today I took notes. um so we did the vocabulary. Um they're introducing third conjugations, which he says just learn these as third conjugations. Don't worry about the endings or anything. But the other ones, because they're vowel endings and they're pretty standard or straightforward, he says those, yeah, just learn that this vowel goes with this conjugation. So I'll work on that. I don't think anything new in this. I mean, nouns, obviously, nouns are nouns. Trying to think what else. We went through the grammar, and it was like pretty dense. There's a lot of stuff that was covered. Um, it covered the conjugations, like the endings, um, of the things, the words, the endings of the words. It went through those. Um, it went through something about commanding and something else. I need to look through that section again. There's another huge section that talked about, like, I can't really explain what it is, but I can give an example. Like, if I would have said, David set his bag on the table, um, most people would assume that his is referring to David. But in Latin, this his, it would be related to somebody else. Like, David stole Julius's bag and set his bag on the table. There, it might be more clear, but yeah. Whereas if you want to say Julius or David set his own bag on the table, obviously there it's very clear that it's talking about David's bag that he physically owns versus some third person. So, yeah, there's some weird stuff. Not weird, it's just new. English doesn't have that. So, yeah, that's a new concept I have to get my head wrapped around. So there's specific words to use if it's like his as in someone else's or his as in his own. Um, so yeah, that was fun. Well, not really, but yeah. Um, let's see here. I think those like the only couple real big things in the grammar. We read through the Fabulae Latinae, which is like we're kind of using it as a pre-read, which I kind of like using it as a pre-read because it's short and succinct. Succinct. I don't know how to say that word, but it's short. It's like less than a page for sure. And it kind of has the story in like a complete, like super short version. So it kind of gives me a little bit easier time with the reading. Except I don't know why I was having a difficult time reading, but I was having a really difficult time reading. Like making out the words was just not fun. So yeah. So we went through that. And that kind of gives us a little bit of an idea of what the story is going to be about. Of course, you got writing in the grammar that tells us too. Basically, there's, we got somebody stole money from the dominant Julius. So we've got that going on. We read that. After we did that, we went through the text of the, oh gosh, what is it? The Ave Verum Corpus, which is for a side project, but it's Latin, so we're kind of working through that. So I'm working on memorizing that. So that was pretty much what we did for Latin. Please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget, ring the notification bell for all notifications.